Have you ever caught yourself scrolling through social media, and without warning, a strange knot tightens in your chest? A friend lands a promotion, a stranger flaunts a perfect life, someone shares a relationship you wish you had, and suddenly there it is. That sharp, uncomfortable sting of jealousy. We don't like to admit it. Most of us pretend we're above it, dismiss it as nothing, or disguise it as indifference. But the truth is, jealousy is one of the most universal emotions humans experience. It slips quietly into our minds, poisoning our happiness, warping our thoughts, and turning our admiration for others into bitterness. Why is it so difficult for us to feel genuine joy for someone else's success? Why does another person's happiness sometimes feel like a personal loss? Buddhism offers a remarkably profound lens through which to examine this. Unlike modern psychology, which often labels jealousy as a natural but undesirable emotion to manage, Buddhism views it as a symptom, a byproduct of something much deeper, rooted in the illusion of self. To understand jealousy, we must first understand the very nature of the mind that gives birth to it. In Buddhist teachings, jealousy is known as Isa, one of the 5 poisons of the mind, along with greed, anger, ignorance, and pride. These poisons cloud our perception, keeping us trapped in cycles of suffering. But jealousy is unique. It's a reflection of both desire and aversion. We desire what others have and simultaneously resent them for having it. This duality splits our heart in two, and if left unchecked, it silently corrodes our peace of mind. The Buddha taught that all suffering arises from attachment and aversion, the clinging to what we want and the rejection of what we don't. Jealousy is both at once, a longing for what is absent and a rejection of the person who possesses it. But where does this reaction come from? Why can't we simply wish others well and move on? At the heart of it lies the illusion of a permanent, separate self, what Buddhist philosophy calls atta, or the ego self. This self believes it exists independently, distinct from others, and constantly seeks validation, recognition, and worth. Whenever it perceives someone else achieving what it desires, beauty, wealth, love, status, it interprets it as a threat to its value. It says, "If they have it and I don't, I must be less." But here's the paradox. In reality, no permanent, fixed self exists. According to Buddhism, the self is a collection of ever-changing physical and mental elements, arising and passing away moment by moment. Like clouds in the sky, thoughts, feelings, and identities shift continuously. The only reason jealousy has such a strong hold over us is because we cling so tightly to this illusion of a solid me and mine. Let's imagine it like this. Picture a glass of clear water. The water itself represents the pure, undisturbed mind. Now drop a small amount of dark ink into the glass. That ink is jealousy. Instantly, the water becomes clouded. The mind, once clear and tranquil, now churns with restless comparisons and longing. And it's exhausting, isn't it? How much of our mental energy do we waste sizing ourselves up against others, measuring our worth through external yardsticks? In this state, every joy we could have felt turns bitter. Every success around us feels like a reminder of our supposed inadequacy. The ancient Buddhist texts describe jealousy as a fire burning the heart from within. The more we feed it with thoughts of comparison and resentment, the hotter it blazes. It not only harms the person experiencing it, but also subtly poisons the atmosphere of relationships and communities. What's tragic is that jealousy often masquerades as harmless. It begins as a simple thought. Why them and not me? Left unattended, it spirals into dissatisfaction with our own life, alienation from others, and even acts of cruelty or sabotage. Yet here's the hope in Buddhist teaching. No matter how deeply rooted jealousy might be, it isn't our true nature. The mind is inherently clear, like that glass of water. The ink of jealousy, though dark and thick, can be diluted and eventually cleared. But it requires seeing jealousy for what it is, not a permanent character flaw or an unavoidable trait, but a conditioned emotional reaction born from misunderstanding. The moment we recognize this, something remarkable happens. The tight grip of envy loosens. Compassion begins to seep in, and we realize we're not alone in this struggle. Everyone wrestles with it in big and small ways. In Buddhist monasteries, novices are often taught a simple yet powerful practice whenever jealousy arises. Instead of recoiling from it, observe it gently as if watching a leaf float by in a stream. No judgment, no suppression, just awareness. Because it's in that quiet, unflinching attention that the poison begins to lose its power. And so, the question isn't how do we get rid of jealousy, but rather how do we understand it so deeply that it no longer controls us. This is where our journey truly begins. If we can trace the roots of jealousy, see the hidden mechanisms behind it, and uncover the deeper truths about the nature of self and the world, we won't just silence envy for a moment, we'll dissolve its very foundation. And that's exactly where we're headed next. There's a saying in ancient Buddhist texts: jealousy burns the one who harbors it, like a fire consuming dry grass. It sounds poetic, but it's also devastatingly accurate. When jealousy takes root in our hearts, it doesn't just affect the way we see others. It fundamentally distorts the way we see ourselves and the world around us. It's not a fleeting emotion that disappears on its own. It's a slow, invisible toxin, clouding the mind, eroding peace, and quietly sabotaging our spiritual path. But why is it so destructive? What makes jealousy, among countless human emotions, so corrosive to the soul? In Buddhist philosophy, every thought, every word, and every action leaves an imprint on the mind. These imprints, known as karma, aren't some supernatural punishment or reward system. They're simply the natural law of cause and effect, the ripples created by every drop we let fall into the pond of our consciousness. And jealousy, it creates some of the darkest ripples. When envy stirs within us, the first casualty is our clarity. The mind, once capable of compassion, insight, and calm observation, becomes agitated. It narrows its focus, fixating on what others have and what we lack. In this contracted state, wisdom cannot arise, compassion retreats, gratitude vanishes. The jealous mind starts crafting false narratives. They don't deserve that. It should have been me. Life isn't fair. These stories, repeated silently over days and years, carve deep grooves in our consciousness, forming habits of thought that trap us in suffering. But it doesn't stop there. According to the Buddha, the mind leads the way in every aspect of life. With our thoughts, we make the world. When jealousy clouds the mind, our actions inevitably follow. We begin to withdraw from those we envy, speaking with subtle sarcasm, withholding kindness, or even sabotaging relationships. And here's the tragedy. Most of the time, the person we envy isn't even aware of it. The suffering is entirely ours to bear. It's like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. In karmic terms, these thoughts and actions plant seeds that will eventually ripen. A mind steeped in jealousy is restless and bitter, often drawing experiences that reinforce its dissatisfaction. It's not cosmic punishment. It's simple resonance. The energy you cultivate within shapes the environment you attract without. But perhaps the most insidious damage jealousy causes is the way it distances us from our own potential. When we obsess over someone else's blessings, we abandon our own path. It's like stopping in the middle of a journey to stare at someone else's road, forgetting that you too are moving toward something meaningful. In Buddhist teaching, this distraction is one of the subtlest obstacles to enlightenment. Not because success or admiration is wrong, but because clinging to comparisons keeps the mind bound to the world of illusion, what we call samsara. And within samsara, there's no peace. Now, let's peel this back a little deeper. What does jealousy reveal about our understanding of self and others? It whispers a dangerous lie, that our worth is relative, that someone else's joy diminishes our own. That life is a zero-sum game, where one person's rise means another's fall. But Buddhism teaches that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. The truth is, in the interconnected web of existence, Another person's success can never rob us of our own. Joy multiplies when shared. Compassion expands when practiced. And every being's growth uplifts the collective. It's only the ego, the false self, that believes it's in competition with the world. The Buddha pointed to this again and again. In the Dhammapada, he warned of the 5 poisons, with jealousy acting as a silent assassin of peace. Left unchecked, it can turn even the most generous heart cold, closing the doors to wisdom and compassion. So what happens when jealousy becomes a habit? When it's no longer an occasional visitor but a constant presence, shaping our relationships and worldview. In karmic law, repetitive thoughts and emotions solidify into traits. A person consumed by jealousy might find themselves isolated, perpetually dissatisfied, or entangled in endless conflict. They might attract others who mirror their own insecurities, reinforcing the cycle. And tragically, they might never recognize the source of their unhappiness. But Buddhism doesn't leave us here, drowning in despair. The entire Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, is an invitation to wake up, to see the poisons for what they are, and to cultivate their antidotes. For jealousy, that antidote is mudita, sympathetic joy, the sincere delight in the happiness and success of others. It's one of the 4 immeasurables, alongside loving kindness, compassion, and equanimity. And here's the paradox. The moment we genuinely feel joy for another's fortune, we dissolve the roots of our own envy. In that act, the mind returns to clarity. The heart becomes spacious again. Karma shifts. It doesn't mean we suppress jealousy or pretend it isn't there. Buddhism encourages us to confront it honestly, with courage and tenderness. To observe how it arises, how it feels in the body, the stories it tells, and then to let it go. This isn't easy. It requires mindfulness, effort, and patience. But it's a path worth walking. Because each moment we choose clarity over comparison, we reclaim our peace. Each time we wish others well, we loosen the chains of our own suffering. And isn't that the real victory? Not in outshining others, but in liberating ourselves from the need to. Some of the most profound transformations in Buddhist history began with this simple realization: I am the source of my peace. No one else holds that power. As we explore deeper, we'll uncover how jealousy not only poisons the heart but stains our future, how it shapes the karmic patterns that ripple through lifetimes, and more importantly, how we can interrupt that cycle. The ancient masters didn't just leave warnings, they left maps. And you, whether you realize it yet or not, have already begun walking one. If jealousy is a poison and karma is the ripple it leaves behind, then what's the root? Why does jealousy appear in the first place? Why does the heart twist when someone else shines? Why do we ache when another's joy seems to eclipse our own? To truly understand this, we have to go deeper. Not into emotions, not even into thoughts, but into the very nature of reality as the Buddha saw it. At the heart of Buddhist wisdom lies 2 truths modern minds often overlook: anatta, the doctrine of no self, and anicca, the truth of impermanence. And it is our ignorance of these 2 that gives rise to jealousy and so much more of our suffering. Let's start with anatta. For most of our lives, we operate under the assumption that there is a fixed, permanent self, a solid me, who owns things, deserves things, and whose worth can rise or fall in relation to others. This self is the one that feels threatened when someone else succeeds. It whispers, "That should have been mine." It panics, "If they have more, I am less." It clings to labels: beautiful, wealthy, respected, talented, believing these external markers define our essence. But the Buddha shattered this illusion. In his great insight under the Bodhi tree, he saw that what we call self is merely a collection of ever-changing processes: body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. None of these are stable, none can be clung to, and none ultimately are mine. The belief in a fixed self is like trying to grasp a fistful of water. No matter how tightly you hold on, it slips through your fingers. And yet this delusion of self is precisely what makes jealousy possible. Because if there's no fixed me, then who is there to be threatened? If all beings are simply waves on the same vast ocean of life, rising and falling by natural causes, then what sense does it make to resent another wave for its brief crest, or pity oneself for a passing trough? It's only when we forget this, when we cling to the fantasy of a solid identity, that we start measuring ourselves against others. And this is where anicca, impermanence, steps in. The Buddha taught that everything, absolutely everything, is in constant flux. Fortunes rise and fall, beauty fades, status shifts, loved ones depart, achievements age. Even the emotions we cherish most and the fears we dread are like clouds in a moving sky. But the jealous mind refuses to accept this. It looks at someone else's success and believes it to be permanent. It imagines their fortune as an eternal monument and our own lack as a fixed fate. It forgets that today's joy can be tomorrow's sorrow, and today's sorrow may bloom into tomorrow's peace. This refusal to see the world's impermanence binds us to suffering. It turns life's natural flow into a personal drama of loss and gain, winning and losing, better and worse. But if we train the mind to see through this illusion, to truly understand that all things, including success and failure, praise and blame, are fleeting, then jealousy begins to lose its grip. A wise monk once said, "Why envy the flower that blooms today? By evening its petals will fall and another will rise tomorrow." And so it is with all things. When we understand anatta, that there is no unchanging self, we stop taking others' fortunes so personally. When we grasp anicca, that nothing lasts, we stop imagining our current state as our permanent reality. And when both of these truths settle into the heart, something remarkable happens. The root of jealousy withers. The fuel for comparison dries up, and in its place, a spaciousness appears, one that allows us to genuinely wish others well and trust that life, in its endless change, holds space for us too. But here's the catch. These aren't concepts to simply accept intellectually. They must be seen directly, felt in the bones of your experience, and that's where mindfulness comes in. Each time jealousy arises, it's a chance to look closely, to ask, who is jealous? Where is this self that's threatened? Will this moment last forever? And with each sincere inquiry, the illusions begin to unravel. It's not about suppressing envy. It's about exposing the mistaken beliefs beneath it. The great Zen master Bankei once said, "When you realize the unborn, jealousy has no foothold." The unborn, the original, unconditioned nature of your mind, untouched by comparison, untouched by gain or loss. This is the deeper work. The reason the Buddha called jealousy one of the most dangerous poisons isn't because it harms others, but because it blinds us to the truth of what we are. And until we face it, we remain trapped in samsara's endless wheel, chasing after what fades, resenting what changes, and mistaking reflections for the real. But the good news is, the moment we become aware of this pattern is the moment we begin to break it. And from there, the path opens. A path we'll continue walking together, because jealousy isn't just an emotional problem. It's a spiritual obstacle, and the Buddha's wisdom offers not only diagnosis, but cure. Stay with me. The next step will reveal the subtle ways jealousy feeds itself in modern life, how it hides behind things like competition, status, and even social media. And more importantly, how you can reclaim your peace. If jealousy is a poison and ignorance its root, then surely there must be an antidote. A way to not only loosen jealousy's grip, but to dissolve it entirely. And the Buddha gave us that remedy, not in abstract ideas, not in cold theories, but in living, breathing states of heart. He called them the Four Brahmaviharas, the divine abodes. Mental habits so noble, so pure that when cultivated, they transform not only the mind that practices them, but the world around it. And at the heart of every teaching on jealousy, these four qualities quietly wait. Let's step into them. The first, metta, loving kindness. Jealousy cannot coexist with genuine goodwill. The envious mind sees another's joy and recoils. Metta sees that same joy and celebrates it. It begins with a simple intention: may you be happy. Not because it benefits me, not because it's easy, but because in the great unfolding of life, your joy does not steal from mine. Metta reminds us that another's success is not our failure. It is simply the natural ripening of their own karma. And by learning to sincerely wish others well, especially those who trigger our jealousy, we begin to loosen the knot inside. Start small, a whisper of goodwill in the mind when someone shares good news, a silent "I'm glad for you," even if a part of you protests. Over time, that whisper grows louder, and one day it becomes the only voice. The second, karuna, compassion. On the surface, jealousy appears as resentment, but beneath it often lies pain, a sense of lack, a quiet ache that says, "Why not me?" Compassion turns toward that pain, not only in ourselves but in others. It recognizes that those we envy are not immune to suffering, that the celebrity we resent has private battles, that the colleague we begrudge may carry invisible burdens, that we, in our jealousy, are hurting too. Karuna does not condone jealousy. It simply holds it with tenderness. It says, "May you be free from this pain, may I be free from mine." And in that softening, envy begins to dissolve. The third, mudita, sympathetic joy. Perhaps the most direct antidote to jealousy. Mudita is the rare ability to take genuine delight in the happiness of others, not tolerate it, not politely pretend, but truly rejoice. When someone else succeeds, mudita feels as though we ourselves have won. When fortune smiles on a friend, we bask in their sunlight, unafraid that it will diminish ours. This quality, more than any other, dismantles the scarcity mindset that jealousy feeds on. It reveals a deeper truth. Joy is not a limited resource. There is no cosmic scoreboard tallying who deserves what. Life flows according to causes and conditions, and what blesses one today may bless another tomorrow. To cultivate mudita, practice noticing the small joys around you: a child's laughter, a stranger's kindness, a friend's good fortune. Let them touch your heart, even if at first it feels foreign. Each moment of shared joy weakens the chains of comparison. And the fourth, upekkha, equanimity, the steady ground beneath the other three. Because even as we cultivate goodwill, compassion, and joy, life remains unpredictable. Some will rise, some will fall, praise will come and go, fortunes will turn. Upekkha teaches us to meet all of it with balance. It reminds us that others' successes are the fruit of their own past actions, as ours will be of ours. It whispers, "Let it be." Not in apathy, but in wisdom. The wisdom that understands this life is a constant play of conditions, not a personal drama. That every being is moving through their own unfolding story, and that clinging, craving, or envying will not change its course, only disturb our peace. Upekkha grants us the strength to witness the world's changes without being broken by them. To see another's fortune and neither grasp nor resent. To remain steady in the face of both praise and blame, loss and gain. Together, these four states form a shield, not against the world, but against the untrained mind's reflex to grasp and compare. In Buddhism, they are called the divine abodes because when you dwell in them, your mind becomes a heaven here and now. And jealousy, it finds no home there. Because when your heart is filled with loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, there's simply no room left for envy to breathe. The good news is, you don't have to master them overnight. It begins with a single intention, a moment's pause before envy speaks, a whispered "May you be well." And from there, the heart begins to turn, slowly at first, then with growing ease. And one day you realize, jealousy, once so sharp, has become a quiet memory, replaced by a peace you hadn't known was possible. As we journey forward, it's worth asking, how does modern life, with its endless comparisons, social feeds, and status games, make this practice harder than ever? And where can we find space to nurture these divine abodes amidst the noise? Stay close, because ahead, we'll step into the very world that feeds our envy and discover how to remain unshaken. It's one thing to understand jealousy, to trace its roots, to recognize its poisons and imagine a mind free from its grip. But without practice, understanding alone is a paper sword. It cuts nothing. It defends no peace. If we want to transform the restless, envious mind, we must step beyond ideas and into direct experience. And in the Buddha's path, that gateway is mindfulness and meditation, not as rituals, not as ancient customs dusted off for modern anxieties, but as living, breathing practices, the very engine of transformation. It begins with a single breath. You don't need a monastery. You don't need incense or chanting bowls. Right here, wherever you are, feel this breath, rising, falling. Notice the mind's constant pull, the comparisons, the quiet judgments, that brief flicker when a friend shares good news and something tightens in your chest. Most people move past it without noticing, but in mindfulness you stop, you see it. Ah, this is jealousy. Not to judge it, not to suppress it, but to witness it with the clarity of a mountain lake. And in that clear seeing, something subtle begins to shift. Because what we see clearly, we are no longer fully controlled by. The Buddha taught that all unwholesome states, greed, hatred, delusion, thrive in darkness. They need your unawareness, your automatic reactions, your unconscious habits. But the moment you shine the steady lamp of mindfulness on them, they weaken. Not instantly, not dramatically, but like mist in the morning sun, they begin to fade. You start to catch jealousy as it arises, feel its heat, watch its stories, notice its hunger. And with practice, you stop feeding it. Meditation deepens this work. When you sit not to achieve, not to escape, but simply to be, you begin to untangle the knots. A simple, quiet practice, breathing in aware of jealousy, breathing out letting it be. You notice its shape, the sensations it stirs in the body, the stories it weaves in the mind. And with each breath, you rest in a deeper awareness that none of it is permanent. The jealousy that once seemed so solid reveals itself as a passing cloud. It arises, it lingers, and it passes, again and again, until one day its grip weakens so completely that it hardly touches you at all. And there's another gift in this practice: compassion for yourself. Mindfulness teaches us that jealousy isn't proof of being a bad person. It's a conditioned habit of a mind still learning. When you sit with your envy, not fleeing it, not feeding it, you realize, so this is what it feels like to be caught in this poison. And in that understanding, a tenderness blooms. You no longer condemn yourself for being jealous. You simply see it. And in seeing it, you begin to heal. The tight grip of shame loosens. And what remains is a quiet resolve to practice again tomorrow. The Buddha often spoke of the mind as a garden. Jealousy is a weed, yes, but even weeds are fed by water, soil, and sun, by unconscious habits and old beliefs. Mindfulness shows you what you've been watering. Meditation gives you the space to choose differently. You learn to water metta instead, to nourish karuna, to shelter mudita, to steady yourself in upekkha. And as those qualities grow, the weeds lose ground, not through violence, not through suppression, but through a natural, inevitable shifting of conditions. Modern life, with its endless comparisons, makes this more urgent than ever. Social feeds, endless status updates. The illusion that someone else's highlight reel is the full story. But here's the truth: every scroll is an opportunity to practice. You feel the flicker of envy. Pause, breathe, name it. This is jealousy. Offer a silent metta, may they be happy. And notice how the heat cools, how the tightness softens. This is how practice weaves into life, not in dramatic retreats, but in quiet, unnoticed moments of wisdom. Over time, something remarkable happens. The mind that was once quick to compare grows still. The heart that was once tight with envy opens, and you begin to feel a freedom that no external achievement, no worldly comparison could match. A peace born not from winning the game, but from no longer needing to play. And in that space, joy blooms for yourself, for others, for this strange, beautiful, impermanent world. As we continue, it's worth asking, if mindfulness and meditation loosen jealousy's grip, How does the ego sneak it back in? How do our stories of self-worth and identity quietly resurrect envy even as we practice letting go? And is there a deeper wisdom, a timeless truth, that cuts through this pattern entirely? The next step on this path leads us there, to the heart of Buddhist insight, to the wisdom that dissolves the very illusion jealousy clings to. Let's walk there together. As the mind grows quieter, as the storms of envy settle into stillness, a deeper question begins to echo within. If jealousy is truly me, then what am I? And this is where the heart of the Buddha's wisdom reveals itself, not as philosophy, not as abstraction, but as direct experience. At the center of all Buddhist teaching is a truth so simple, so profound, that the mind conditioned by comparison resists it at every turn. Nothing we cling to has a fixed, independent, permanent self. Not our possessions, not our achievements, and not even this I who envies. Jealousy, like every other mental state, is empty, empty of essence, empty of solidity, empty of a separate, enduring self. It arises dependent on conditions. And when those conditions fade, so does the jealousy. But it gets even subtler than that. What we call I am jealous is a thought, a fleeting mental formation, no more personal than a cloud drifting across an open sky, yet we grasp it, name it, claim it, and in that grasping we suffer. The Buddha called this illusion of a permanent, independent self anatta, not self. It's one of the most liberating, terrifying insights a human being can encounter, because the ego clings tightly to identity, to being the one who is better or the one who is lacking, to being envied or to envying others. But when you sit quietly and observe the arising and fading of jealousy, you begin to see. There is no solid jealous me, only the arising of causes and conditions, a thought here, a sensation there, a fleeting emotion. And when those conditions dissolve, what remains? Not nothingness, but openness. A vast, clear awareness untouched by envy, untouched by clinging. This is what the wisdom of emptiness reveals, that everything we believe to be solid and personal is, in truth, fluid and dependent. The one you envy today will one day face loss. The thing you crave will one day break, fade, or lose meaning. The self you're desperately trying to protect or elevate is a momentary appearance in the field of awareness. When we see this not as theory but as direct insight, jealousy begins to unravel at the root. Why envy what is empty? Why cling to a self that never stays the same? Why fight for illusions? Emptiness in Buddhism isn't nihilism. It's not a cold void. It's freedom. The freedom to see everything as interconnected, impermanent, and ultimately without the burden of fixed identity. And in that vision, something beautiful blooms, compassion. Because when you realize your own self is a fluid, temporary appearance, so is everyone else's. The one you envied is suffering too, chasing illusions, protecting masks, fearing loss, and you see yourself in them, and them in you. The walls crack, the comparisons dissolve, and what remains is kindness. The ancient masters compared the wisdom of emptiness to a mirror. A flawless, clear mirror reflects all things without clinging to any of them, beauty and ugliness, success and failure, praise and blame. They appear in the mirror of awareness and they pass. Jealousy too appears, it flickers and it fades, and the mirror remains untouched. This is your natural mind, not the restless, comparing selfie, but the vast, silent awareness within which all experience comes and goes. And the paradox is this: the more deeply you realize the emptiness of jealousy, the more room there is for joy. Not the brittle, competitive joy of being better, but the effortless, boundless joy of simply being. You celebrate others' happiness because you know it's not separate from yours. You rejoice in their success because it harms nothing in you. There's no you to harm, and so life softens. The heart opens. The mind grows luminous. This isn't distant, esoteric mysticism. It's as close as your next breath, as simple as watching a thought rise and fall without clinging. And in that moment, jealousy has no home. As we near the close of this path together, one final step remains. Because while wisdom opens the eyes, the world will still tempt you, old habits will whisper, jealousy may knock again at your door. And so we end not with ideas but with a vow, a promise to yourself and to this human life, a way to carry this understanding, this freedom, into the messy, beautiful, imperfect world we all share. That's where we'll go next. And so here we are, after walking through the tangled, thorny path of jealousy, after peering into the dark corners of the mind, after sitting quietly in the vastness of emptiness, one truth stands clear: jealousy was never your enemy. It was your teacher, a stubborn, uncomfortable, relentless one, but a teacher nonetheless, because every pang of envy, every restless moment of comparison was pointing you somewhere, not toward more things to chase, not toward a more perfect self-image, but toward freedom. In Buddhism, they say, no mud, no lotus. The lotus, one of the world's most beautiful flowers, grows in filthy, stagnant water, its roots buried deep in muck. And yet it rises, petals clean, leaves untouched. That's your heart, that's your potential. Jealousy, anger, greed, sorrow, they're the mud. And from that very mud, with awareness and wisdom, a lotus can bloom. You don't need to exile your jealousy. You don't need to pretend you're beyond it. You only need to see it clearly, understand it deeply, and let it dissolve in the light of insight. Because life isn't a competition, it's a shared pilgrimage. Every person you envy is carrying unseen burdens. Every success you covet comes with its own suffering. Every flaw you hide is mirrored in others. And when you see this, truly see it, the walls of separation begin to crumble. What's left isn't emptiness in the cold, bleak sense, but emptiness as space, a vast, open field where kindness can grow, joy can flow without needing permission, and compassion moves freely. That's the life you were meant for. A life where you celebrate others' joys as your own, where you measure your days not by victories won but by peace kept, not by how high you rise but by how gently you walk. And in every moment of envy you remember, this too shall pass, and from this mud my lotus will bloom. So if this journey spoke to something in you, if you felt even a flicker of recognition, a softening, a breath of quiet truth, then I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe to this channel, not just for teachings, but to walk together in this strange, beautiful, difficult life. Leave a comment below. Share a moment when jealousy visited you and what you learned from it, or what you still struggle with. Because you're not alone. We build this community not as perfect sages, but as fellow travelers, each finding our way out of the mud and toward the light. And if you feel this message could ease someone else's burden, share it with them. A single kind word, a simple teaching can change the course of a life. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time, may your heart be light, your mind be clear, and your lotus bloom.